we're glad that it's being addressed. I am here today because a number of our member agencies have expressed some technical concerns with certain aspects of the policy, and I will leave it to those agencies to talk about those specific concerns because they definitely can talk about those better than myself. But I want to encourage the board to consider those comments carefully. We know a lot of work has gone into the current policy, but we want to make sure that the final policy allows for the diversity of local groundwater conditions and also allows our agencies to serve high-quality groundwater to their customers without being subject to additional liability for cleaning up groundwater pollution from outside parties. And if there's anything Aqua can do to facilitate the process as this moves forward, we really would appreciate that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, young lady.
I'm going to pick on you.
Okay.
Because I've heard
That's
this.
okay.
I've heard this comment
Not
made.
always pretty.
No, I was waiting for that.
I've heard this comment several times today, as well as in the written letters that were submitted. So, in the draft policy, there are two clauses. Mm-hmm. One that says, even if your site meet all these conditions, there could be site-specific conditions that merit the site remaining open. There's another clause that says, even if your site does not meet all these conditions, there could be site-specific aspects that merit closure of the site. Now, in my mind, those are two pretty broad, inclusive clauses. You know, if I had my druthers, I wouldn't have them, but I recognize the complexity and the variability of issues out there. I see those two clauses as capturing all the specific, site-specific concerns that people might have, because there's no way a policy could address every single circumstances that may occur now, in the past, or in the future. So just, you seem to be an intelligent, rational person, so I'm going to pick on you.
No,
and ask, with those two clauses, what else would you need to be comfortable that site-specific considerations will be part of the decision-making process?
Right, well, and and I appreciate the work that we all have done with all three of you regarding that recognition of the diversity of groundwater in the state, because it is, in different areas so different. And I know with your travels throughout the state, you have experienced that firsthand. And I think that those clauses that you're speaking to do address that issue. I know that the particular agencies I'm talking about, Alameda County, I know is here, Alameda County Water District, and Zone 7 and Santa Clara Valley Water District have come to me expressing some specific concerns about technical issues within the permit that they feel would not allow them to maintain their groundwater supplies and would expose them to additional liability. So as far as whether those particular site-specific clauses cause them heartburn, that's something that they will be able to specifically
But it doesn't
address.
cause you heartburn.
So I agree that they go, and which is why I acknowledge the staff's work, because I do think that the state board really is moving in the right direction with this policy. I echo a lot of the comments of what the different speakers have said about this is something that needs to be addressed. It is an issue that has been, needs to be moving forward, and it's something that we hope we can work on. And I know this is something we haven't engaged in before, but we hope as it moves forward that we can be part of it. So, and I've spoken with Kevin about the possibility of our involvement. So.
All right. Nice dancing. I'll stop picking on you.
Right.
Thank you.
That's fine. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I don't have a question for Danielle, but to Kevin, because as was brought up by Zone 7, and I assume is going to be brought up by others, these actively managed conjunctive use groundwater basins, are those the site-specific conditions that would trigger either certainly a strong look at what is going to happen there?
Well, yes, we look at those as a subset. It's one type of site-specific condition. One of the things that we know about groundwater is that you can be close to something without impacting it. Mm-hmm. And so you would need to look at how close you were to those recharge basins, what the soil types were, you know, many different things. And we would expect that water districts would weigh in on closures that were impacting their basins and perhaps ask for that consideration. So we think it's entirely appropriate that water districts would do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Howard Whitney.
Good morning, Chair and board members. Let's see. Just roll the wheel. Great. I'm Howard Whitney with Remediation Testing and Design. I was on the task force, and I provided technical comments in a letter and also directly with your risk assessment staff. The draft policy is science-based, so I really appreciate this. It's really, finally, we're getting to the state of the art 25 years ago today, but, you know, better late than never. I don't think you need to change the groundwater policy. I'm very happy with that. You could add TBA, but, you know, it's not important to me. Some people are concerned about it. The policy is focused on source removal, which I don't think is emphasized enough, and it's very important. But one of the problems that I see is that some of the biodegradation of soil vapor is overstated, and I believe we'd be better off using TPH fractions for determining soil and soil vapor closure. As far as groundwater not being a threat, there's been a ton of studies for the last 20 years. We don't have to go through them, including MTBE. Since it's been discontinued, those plumes are depleting very quickly. Impacts to municipal supplies diminish rapidly. Plumes rarely expand. They're confined to unused shallow zones, and this is ubiquitous. I've worked in dozens of states for over 30 years, and the concept of in situ biodegradation of petroleum hydrocarbons is ubiquitous. It happens at every single site, okay? And there's evidence of it at every single site that I've ever worked at. And so this whole concept of, oh, it requires special conditions is absolutely and completely false. It happens everywhere. It happens all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And these studies have shown that the impacts are confined to unused shallow zones. Very rare do we find human or environmental exposure pathways to be complete. And also, groundwater remediation is fairly infeasible and it's very cost prohibitive. It makes lots of money for these chemical injection companies and whatnot. We can clean up soil very well, but groundwater is very difficult to deal with to get it down to the MCLs right away. Let's see, here we go. Shallow zones are frequently already polluted. They lack the yield for reliable drinking water wells. And well construction standards generally are protective of shallow zone pollution. So you're talking about these large managed basins. They have wells that have 500 feet of concrete seal on them. You know, I don't see a big risk there with little gasoline plumes hanging out. Also, the issue of recharge basins, during the El Nino of '98, when we had a bunch of natural recharge, that's when we saw just massive biodegradation occurring. So if you're adding water to basins, you're only going to increase the natural biodegradation factor. You're going to lower the risk, not increase it. Let's see, one of these days, okay, here we go. The policy is great. The leaking tanks and pipes are removed, free product is removed, secondary sources are removed. You cut off the head and the plume will die. That's my experience. Now the problem with soil vapor, most soil vapor sampling methods are bias low. I'm very experienced with that. I'm an old guy, but I still get out there and do all my own field work. And I've been concentrating on soil vapor for the last several years. And I can tell you that people collect a lot of bad samples. Also, groundwater sampling is bias high. People frequently use balers to collect samples. They stir everything up. And so you got extra high water, extra low vapor, and you think, okay, you know, it's biodegrading. But that's not necessarily the case. Now, the heavy aromatics and the BTEX, those are going to biodegrade pretty well because they're very water soluble. But the other parts of TPH that include the very volatile aliphatics, they do not biodegrade very well, and my recent work has shown that. Now, why is TPH important? Because the chemicals that we're looking at in the policy, benzene, naphthalene, ethylbenzene, and PAHs, they only comprise 5% or less of gasoline. Now, like I've said before, the aliphatic portion of gasoline dominates soil vapor. I'm not seeing BTEX, but I'm seeing a lot of that stuff. At fairly high concentrations, it's fairly low toxicity. It may or may not be a threat, but that's what we need to be looking at because that's the chemical of concern for that. Now, in terms of soil, what's remaining in soil are the heavy aromatics. The contractors call that stuff methyl ethyl death because it just smells awful. Now, there's not a lot known about the actual toxicity of it, but that's really the nuisance effect for contaminated soil. And so I think it's important that we look at these fractions of TPH because of their different behaviors. Obviously, BTEX, MTBE, TBA dominate groundwater. This is a site conceptual model, too complex to look at right now. So I've proposed some draft screening levels for the light aliphatics and soil vapor. Those are very high. They're indicative of about, for the residential exposure, the TPH is about 16 times higher than the current San Francisco ESL. Now the soil vapor, about 150 parts per million for TPH. Now that's based on, that's driven by the light aliphatics and its percentage in what we would expect to find in gasoline. So the 150 number is not too far apart from your 100 part per million number that staff has proposed. Direct residential soil contact, 75, fairly close. I think one of the things that's important is to look at what is the free product number for soil. It's about 800. I think the policy would be better if we looked at these more specific pathways and fractions of TPH. Anyways, to summarize once again, love the science base. It's very important that this be a policy and not be a guideline, because it communicates from the state board that risk assessment is now accepted state policy, and that is very, very important out here in the regulated community. Again, don't change groundwater. We're fine with it. Groundwater is fine. I mean, you really, I think the worries are way overstated, and the policy is very good. And I think with the focus on TPH and specifying the nuisance aspects and those exposures, maybe it'll make the property owners a little bit more comfortable with getting their site closure. Anyway, thank you very much, and if you got any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whitney. John Weed. Would you like Mr. Perkins to come up with you, or are you guys speaking as a team there?
Good morning. Good afternoon, almost. Good morning still. John Weed. I'm president of the board of directors of the Alameda County Water District. We serve a population of 328,000 in the cities of Fremont, Newark, Union City, southern Alameda County. We overlie the Niles Cone groundwater basin, which accounts for approximately half of our potable water supply. We're particularly concerned that the policy does not specifically address the conjunctive actively managed water uses. It may well be the practice to address those as a subset, but I did not find in my reading of the policy that distinction being made. We have, our board has passed a resolution in support of our presentation today. 4 members of our staff, including myself, are here. Mr. Bob Schaefer, who is the Assistant General Manager, Mr. Stephen N., our Groundwater Resources Manager, and Mr. Tom Perkins, who is a Groundwater Resource Program Coordinator, and he can address more specific issues. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Perkins.
Good morning, board members. My name is Thomas Perkins, the Groundwater Protection Program Coordinator for the Alameda County Water District, or ACWD. Safe and clean groundwater is critical to protect public health and maintain economic vitality in southwestern Alameda County. That is why in the mid-1980s, ACWD assumed a leadership role in overseeing the investigation and cleanup of UST cases, and that role was subsequently formalized in a cooperative agreement with the regional board in 1996. ACWD assumed this role without any funding from the state. Before providing detailed comments, I would like to emphasize that the SED is fundamentally flawed. The SED document, like the scoping document before it, asserts that there will be no water quality impacts resulting from adoption of the draft policy, based primarily on the contention that the existing contamination in the subsurface is the baseline condition. A more appropriate baseline to determine the overall impacts of the draft policy would be to use the current closure process. I would now like to summarize the ACWD Board of Directors resolution, which requests 3 modifications to the draft policy. The first requested modification is to provide an exemption for groundwater basins that are actively used as a drinking water supply and are vulnerable to contaminants. The policy essentially considers all groundwater basins in the state to be equally at risk, which is simply not the case. The groundwater closure criteria should take into consideration such factors as whether the groundwater basin is actively used as a drinking water source, the presence of shallow drinking water aquifers, which ACWD has, and lack of natural clay barriers to prevent contamination from impacting those drinking water aquifers. ACWD recognizes that the policy does not require the state board to close all cases that may meet the criteria. However, we believe that the policy should explicitly include an exemption for groundwater basins that are actively used and are more vulnerable to contamination. This would emphasize that protection of drinking water resources is of paramount importance and provide appropriate policy guidance to all interested parties. Additionally, the policy should incorporate the California Department of Public Health's approved groundwater protection zones for public water supply wells. As the state agency that regulates public drinking water systems in California, the CDPH preferred method for delineating protection zones is based on readily available local hydrogeologic information and not the arbitrary distances established in the draft policy. The second requested modification is to address the cumulative impacts from closing numerous cases with elevated concentrations of petroleum hydrocarbons. The policy needs to consider the cumulative impacts from all the combined sites, particularly within a groundwater basin, and not look at each individual site as if it were an isolated case. The policy does not account for the fact that leaving residual petroleum hydrocarbons in groundwater may interfere with the development of new groundwater sources, and it will not be possible to confirm when those groundwater sources will be available again unless new monitoring wells are installed. The policy also needs to take into consideration the financial impacts on off-site property owners and utility companies for leaving contamination behind and not managed. For example, contaminated soil encountered when installing or maintaining water mains would increase costs to utilities such as ACWD. The third requested modification is to ensure that the burden and expense associated with tracking groundwater plumes remains with the responsible party and is not placed on local agencies, residents, and businesses. Closing the majority of UST cases without any further cleanup or groundwater monitoring unjustly shifts the burden of groundwater protection and monitoring to local water districts and utilities such as ACWD. The preamble to the draft policy states, the policy seeks to increase UST cleanup process efficiency. The proposed policy does not improve the cleanup process efficiency. It only speeds up the closure process and thereby transfers the legal and financial liability of managing contaminated properties to others. In conclusion, ACWD considers the draft policy to be of utmost importance to residents and businesses that receive water from ACWD. Therefore, we respectfully request the State Board to consider ACWD's resolution number 1216 and modify the draft policy accordingly. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Jay McKeema?
Good morning, board members. And first of all, I want to thank you for your courage and your dedication in getting this policy before us for consideration and discussion. It's an essential element of the whole process that we have entered into in terms of looking at the underground storage tank program, the remediation of underground storage tanks, and the reimbursement of property owners for their efforts. I represent the California Independent Oil Marketers Association. Our membership is largely small businesses that are directly involved in the distribution of petroleum products in the state, so we're directly affected by this program. This program, this policy, frankly, is the crown jewel in the effort so far. A lot of hard work has been done, and we sincerely appreciate that, and we sincerely recognize our responsibility and our needed efforts to continue the improvement process of the underground storage tank fund in this state. Once it was a model program. In 2008, it lost its luster, and we have all been working hard since that point in time to recapture the essence of what the program's about and the fact that it can be looked at by everybody as a model program. We're getting there. One step at a time. It's an incremental process. It took a lot of time to create the problems. It's taking some time to solve the problems. But the good news is that there is a collaborative effort. In the legislature, we forged a unique bipartisan partnership in terms of looking at legislation, in terms of passing legislation that is, again, taking incremental steps to improve the process and the lines of responsibility and decision-making for the underground storage tank program. This policy addresses a glaring lack of policy by the Water Board in the past. And our members have all had direct experience with that situation where there are many, many definitions of how clean is clean. Certainly the Water Board even has its own list of differing definitions of how clean is clean. This policy, for the first time, recognizes that there needs to be a line of demarcation and that there needs to be some ability for all agencies and the RPs and the consultants involved to understand when a site may be low risk. Again, to emphasize, I was on the working group, and I know I don't speak for them, but I can speak for the amount of effort and the amount of discussion that we had on the issues of trying to make this a micrometer or a yardstick. This is a yardstick. You use it to gauge sites based upon broad parameters, and then you make subsequent decisions in whether those parameters do in fact lead to a low-risk site. Ultimately, as the condition stands right now in the state, the local agencies hold the hammer on this. They hold the hammer on whether or not they're going to allow a site to be low risk. You can appeal to the Water Board and try to resolve issues that you're having at the local agency, but at the end of the day, a local agency can issue a notice of violation on a site. When that happens, ironically, you're kicked out of the fund. So there's pretty strong motivation for property owners to keep working beyond just the general liability and the conscience of the individual property owner. There was other strong motivations to get the job done, but to get it done effectively. I think it was interesting to me to see that that the largest allocation of staff resources in the Water Board goes to this program. That's very telling. And I would have to argue that's probably not the best allocation of resources in the broader perspective of water quality in this state for the outcome. Very rare instances of petroleum contamination in public water wells or adversely affecting the human health or the environment. So one could argue that the expenditure of $2 billion of funding has created that condition. But I think when you look at the number of sites that are still open in this state and are still draining valuable resources, you have to come up with a different conclusion, and that conclusion is more sites need to be closed, and you need an impetus, you need a bright line in the universe to show where those sites should fall one side or the other. Again, there's plenty of latitude in the policy, we believe, for local agencies to define exceptions. It does shift the burden of proof to the local agencies to say, wait a minute, your site doesn't work because of this. And all too often our members have encountered your site just it shouldn't be closed. And there needs to be a more educated dialogue on that. So anyway, we absolutely support the adoption of this policy. We adopt the adoption of this policy very quickly, and we support the adoption of this policy as it's written and submitted to you. And we thank you for your efforts, and we thank staff for their efforts as well.
Thank you, Jay. Bob Clark Rydell.
Hello, thank you, Board. Thank you, Kevin, Lori, and Cleanup Fund, and everybody here. And thank you Jay, for your eloquent comments. I'm Bob Clark Rydell with Pangea Environmental. I have a small firm, and I'm also here representing CORE, primarily speaking on behalf of CORE Environmental Foundation. And we are a relatively new entity that proceed with this. On top? All right. So we were founded about in 2009 when the model program, as Jay said, lost its luster, and we helped with the dialogue and correcting some of the issues that came up. And this low threat policy is a later evolution of that crisis, and it's well needed. We represent consultants, owners, operators of stations, and environmental vendors. We try to represent regulators to the extent we can. They feel sort of conflicted with joining our organization, but we try to wear that hat to the extent we can. We meet regularly with the Cleanup Fund to maintain discussion, and with the local agencies, and our members provide a lot of feedback so we can help come up with good solutions here that work for everybody. We helped identify the need for additional funding with AB 291 last year that passed to maintain the fee so that some of our budgetary crises wouldn't be larger than they are now. And we're keeping our eye on what needs we might have in the future, such as this policy. So with this policy, if it passes or doesn't pass or comments are incorporated, there could be other legislative or administrative changes that go along to mitigate some of the negative effects of this, such as liability passing on to property owners when the case is reopening and whatnot. Maybe having some ability for funds to be set aside, like some people have said. And I also wanted to highlight that we're somewhat a new player in this, and we are looking for more people to join our organization or contribute so we can help provide more efforts on this. First off, I think this low threat policy is a benefit of one of the big benefits is it's an example of good government. I mean, we've needed this for a long time. It's about time we have something like this. From CORE, we are saying that we think this additional policy or guidance can provide greater clarity on the USD case closure criteria statewide. There's a lot of inconsistency, as people have acknowledged. It'll help expedite case closures at low threat sites, help control these costs, help us focus these resources where they're needed. There isn't currently a triage process where you can spend more money on the sites that might pose a greater risk it's sort of on an individual basis. Boom, boom, boom. So our recommendations for the low threat closure policy are essentially to consider the comments that you've heard from the public today and in writing before, to help ensure the soundness of the science behind the policy, to help maintain transparency throughout this policy and the adoption of the policy, and then to mitigate, minimize any negative effects of the residual contamination for the claimants, property owners, UST owners, and businesses. I'm reading this is kind of small, maybe you guys can't see it, but there is the potential for reopening cases during property transactions, or if new information comes up, maybe there could be resumed access to the cleanup fund for reimbursement in that case. What about the cost to handle residual contamination before and after closure? You know, vapor barriers, future soil disposal, future assessment costs. Sometimes outside the cleanup fund, when a major oil hands over property to a smaller entity, if they find soil that has to be disposed later, those costs are covered. So these are potential solutions that maybe don't end up in the policy, but could be addressed administratively or legislatively in some other manner. There are lender concerns with these. We've heard about that as well. If you refinance your property, the interest rate could be higher. If you're selling the property, the value could be lower. And trying to keep any mandatory deed restrictions to a minimum is what we've heard from our clients and property owners. And then, as I said, it may end up revising the cleanup fund and USD program to minimize some of these effects. I just wanted to emphasize some of the things that CORE are doing in case people do contribute or join us. We are actively working with stakeholders for administrative solutions on these UST issues, trying to help improve the budget process, because the budget process is new and it's challenging, and there's a lot of people that we hear from are really confused and are holding some of the liability with money and risk of maybe not getting reimbursed. Property owners are worried that their sites are not getting cleaned up and the fund might go away and they'll be stuck holding the bag. So we're working on that. One of the key areas is the interaction between the cleanup fund and the USD program and the local agencies. On one hand, you have the agencies issuing directives and making you do work and potentially threatening a notice of violation. On the other hand, you have the cleanup fund says, we have a budget and you can only do so much, and the RPs get stuck in the middle. And we think that's a really important area to try to do what we can to bridge that gap. Finally, enhancing the appeal processing for case closures and eligible cost determination so that it's faster. Some are taking years and years and years. So that's one thing we're working on. Then we're working on legislative solutions to potentially extend the sunset. It's clear there's not enough resources to get all the work done needed by 2016. There's a consideration to maintaining the 2-cent fee or increasing or decreasing the fee. I believe, as Tam said, we should look at our needs and then maybe try to set the fee based on what our needs are. Maybe it's less once the low threat policy is implemented. Maybe it's more. And we want to get to the point where we can have some of the applicants to the fund actually get into the fund, because they've been waiting for a couple of years now to get in, and they have they're supposed to demonstrate financial responsibility, and they can't really do that with the current state of affairs. Everything's kind of slowed down. Thank you, it made it. So I wanted to maybe lighten things up here a little bit. I prepared this illustration or a site conceptual model, something we use in the industry to graphically illustrate what's going on so we don't have to read a bunch of reports. And it was fun to prepare, I have to admit, and I was lying in bed envisioning icebergs coming at the waterboard. I hope it doesn't bring up any Titanic references or anything like that, but it is sort of the 100-year reunion or whatever it is. But I wanted with this graphic to really depict that CORE is doing what we can to be here and help resolve some of the issues we have. I see the state board up there as the captain of the ship, obviously. And on one hand, they do have the directive letters. On the other hand, they have the budget limitations. And you can see the pile of directives behind the state board, which are cost to the fund and the state. And then on the right hand is the budgets. There's only so much they can spend. So we don't want to have too many directives. Like in 2009, they did ratchet back on the directives. So I think we need to get back to that. You can see the parties on the boat, the RPs, the LOPs. It's kind of hard to make out. Lenders, public health, and industry are all on this boat together. And we see in the past, we've had the 2009 crisis. There's some legislation to increase the fee and recently to maintain the fee and to streamline the agencies. Those are the assembly bills there, stuck into the iceberg, if you will, and it's shattered. And then on the right, we're looking at potential future legislation, and this the policy, the low threat policy is going after really trying to minimize the active claim costs, so we don't cleaning up sites that maybe don't need that money. AB 1701 is current legislation that's trying to streamline the agencies and minimize the number of agencies out there and all the various parties to kind of make that more consistent. And then we're talking about potential future legislation for 2003, how we could deal with the sunset or residual contamination, maybe some fallout from this policy. And then finally, I just wanted to add that one thing that's somewhat encumbering the cleanup fund to a certain extent and the USD program is the dinghy behind the boat, where there's a lot of new tasks that are being required of the state board. There's a lot of appeals that the board has acknowledged that are not getting done quickly. It's a relatively low priority. The priority is reimbursing and claims and closing cases. And there's the budget review process is a new process that they have to go through, and I think it's helpful and it's very good, but it requires more effort and more transparency is requested by our members. And then there's the review of these low threat closure. If it comes through, we're going to have to go back with the 5-year review process and look at all these cases. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to make this ship really sail smoothly. So I just wanted to wrap on up and summarize with this is core, this is who we are, this is where you can find out more about us, and thank you very much.
I'm sure James Cameron will be contacting you in the near future. Thank you for your comments.
Copyrighted, thank you.
Julia Mackley.
Thank you, Chair and board members. My name is Julia McClay, and I'm representing the Santa Clara Valley Water District. By way of background, our agency is the Groundwater Management Agency for Santa Clara County. Nearly half the water used in the county comes from groundwater, and in the southern portion of the county, it is the sole source of drinking water. The district managed the local oversight program for over 15 years until it was transferred to the Santa Clara County Department of Environmental Health in 2004. Of the 2,500 fuel leak cases that were opened during this period, the district successfully worked with responsible parties and their consultants to close more than 75% of those cases. We did submit a comment letter by the March deadline, so I'm just going to touch briefly on the items addressed in our comment letter, but some questions were raised about the exception to the low threat policy, and so I wanted to address that issue and why we are concerned with what is in the current policy. Very briefly, we support a low threat closure policy that provides consistent principles to guide decisions and achieve rational outcomes for the closure of UST sites based on site-specific analysis and demonstrated low risk to human health and the environment. And we do appreciate the issues of staff and the stakeholder work group to achieve this goal. That said, we do not support the proposed policy that is before you today for 4 primary reasons. First of all, in our opinion, a statewide policy that closes contamination sites based on fixed numeric targets does not adequately address local concerns and conditions. In many instances, it could lead to residual contamination being left in place simply because it meets targets, even though additional cleanup may be feasible, cost-effective, and warranted to protect groundwater resources. Secondly, we believe that the policy is not adequately protective of groundwater resources. The policy would allow residual contamination at levels many, many times higher than drinking water quality standards for some constituents. And in high-quality, high-use groundwater basins such as ours, residual contamination at these levels is a serious concern. We understand that there is an assumption that shallow groundwater will not be used in the future for drinking water purposes, and our concern is that this is not a realistic assumption, that due to population growth, reduced availability of other supplies, and potential impacts of climate change, that this could be a faulty assumption. Third, we have a concern that the policy does not adequately address off-site cleanup. It would allow for closure of sites with plumes up to 1,000 feet long and restrict the ability of local oversight agencies to require cleanup of off-site plumes. Although the policy does require a demonstration that the site doesn't pose a threat to human health, we are concerned that it does not consider the protection of other beneficial uses. And our fourth concern, and the one that the questions were asked about, was we're concerned that the policy inappropriately shifts the burden of proof from the responsible party to others, including the local oversight agencies and taxpayers. Local oversight agencies would be required to demonstrate that a site does not meet the low threat criteria in order to keep it open. And we think that this shifts the responsibility from the responsible party to the oversight agency and ultimately the taxpayers. We believe that the burden to demonstrate that a site does not pose a threat to human health or water resources should remain with the responsible party and not with the oversight agency. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McClay. Mr. Carlton.
Gary Carlton, Kenny Jenks Consultants, representing the City of San Diego. Good morning, Chair Hoppen and board members. By way of background, the City of San Diego Public Utilities Department serves approximately 1.3 million customers within their service area with potable water. Historically, the city has relied...
I've been reading a little bit about that.
Pardon?
I've been reading a little bit about that.
Yes. Historically, the city has relied on surface water sources, both local and imported water. Currently, they have a very vigorous program going on to evaluate the potential use of their local groundwater basins for future supply sources, and are actually moving forward with projects to implement that. Therefore, the proposed policy is of significant interest to them in regards to the area of protecting the potential future groundwater supply sources, as has been discussed here a great deal today by other commenters, and commenters who have raised some good technical points on the protectiveness of the policy. I also found Board Member Doduk's characterization of the flexibility in the policy to be persuasive. It does provide for site-specific conditions to be considered across the full range of being the basis for keeping a site open, or can even have a site closed when it doesn't meet all criteria. So it does provide the staff at the State Board and local agencies with a good deal of flexibility in evaluating application of the policy. With that said, then we believe that the success of implementing those criteria and that approach really is largely a manner of effective communication, collaboration, and cooperation. And on this basis, the city has engaged the staff on discussions about these issues of communication and cooperation, collaboration. The March 13th comment letter was submitted by the city and had 3 specific requests which were discussed with staff. I'd like to cover those now. The first comment that was provided by the city had to deal with communication, notification. The city is very desirous to ensure that their public utilities department is in fact notified when a site has been nominated for this closure process. And given the shifting resources we have at our agencies today and all of our workplaces, staff can come and staff can go. So it was in discussing with staff, we had first requested written notification. A point was made that the board's trying to move away from paper and more to electronic. So we agreed that perhaps electronic notification with a verification, very simple little mechanism on your computer requires a request be sent so that then the board can be certain that someone at the agency has opened and read this communication. Notification is very important to the city to ensure that it happens so that they can be participating in the process, the discussion that ensues. Secondly, the review period, the policy suggested 30 days to review and comment. We're asking that that be extended to 60 days. The level of communication and collaboration that needs to go on, staff shortages that sometimes delay looking into matters, we think 60 days would be more prudent to allow that for a review period. And finally, I think most importantly is back to the collaboration communication. The city would request that as part of the implementation of their policy, the state board make a concerted effort at publicizing the adoption of the policy, having the public relations department here at the board work with 3 agencies in particular to publish informative articles that would inform all affected parties in the water supply community. We're suggesting the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, CSAC, and AQUA, work with them to contain in their publications, which reach a very, very wide membership, notification of the adoption, about how it's going to be implemented, and hopefully contribute to collaboration that's required really on a local level to make this approach successful. And finally, would suggest that the State Board encourage each of the regions to hold workshops when the policy is adopted and have a large invitee list to present the policy, roll it out, if you will, on a regional level with local agencies who are going to be impacted. And with that, those are our comments. As I say, the city has many of the concerns that have been stated here by other parties about the policy and unintended consequences, but are supporting it on the basis of the hope and expectation that it will be implemented in a way that allows for wide communication and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Gary. Our last speaker is Aisha Masso.
Hello, my name is Aisha Massel. I am entering a graduate program in environmental engineering at UC Berkeley next year. I'm also been working, yeah, I'm excited. I've also been working in the field of underground storage tank cleanup for the past 2 years with a small consulting firm. I'm here on behalf of myself, my daughter, my daughter's children, and all of their peers. I think maybe even though it is implicit in what everyone has been saying, we really need to pay attention to the future, not just the current present conditions. And at the university level, there is a definite push in research to find ways to replenish our underground water systems. This includes urban stormwater infiltration, cleanup of that before it gets into our underground storage facilities or water tables. So what I find is a real lack of looking at the future in this policy. What is defined as a low threat closure area is a currently unused, maybe unincorporated, or perhaps access to municipal water sources. However, what it's not taking into account, some people have mentioned, is that the municipal water themselves will be looking into groundwater sources as drinking water. So I find that very troubling. And the future of water is really the future of our economy, is the future of our health. And it is going to get more and more scarce as the years go by. So that is one thing that if we care about the future of California, we really must care about the future of our groundwater. I do not think that the low threat policy closure or closure policy adequately addresses that. The other thing I'm very concerned about is the process of this low threat closure policy. I do not feel adequate stakeholders were involved. A lot of people who know a lot about this type of issue were not asked to be a part of the process. And I know nothing is perfect. However, this is a very important issue for all Californians. And at the very least, continue to keep public comment open. make this type of document accessible to the average person who will be the end user of this product, which is the water. Right now, nobody can understand it, and so outside of the field. So I really encourage that there be a lot more consideration brought into adopting this policy before adopting it and allowing the public more access to information. Thank you.
Thank you for your concerns and comments. That concludes our speakers. I would once again like to thank staff. We are often reminded for the need of, and we just have been, of stakeholder input, public process. I think you have done a good job and will continue doing a good job on that, because as we've heard today, there are a lot of different opinions. Certainly all of them are valid, but I would like to thank you, Kevin and Lori, for taking this task to heart. Certainly it was something that was important to me, that we do it in a responsible way, and in our zeal to save money, don't degrade the environment. So I think we're, approaching a point where we can start talking about a final document, but the information that was received today, regardless of the opinion, I think was very important. And so all of you that took time to be here today, I appreciate it very much. My colleagues, they're hungry.
Not so hungry, but I also appreciate the fact that that people were here, and I was particularly pleased that that the City of San Diego and the representative emphasized the communication element of this, because I do think that that is the key, because there is a time frame within which people can come forward and comment or influence what cases will actually get closed. And so that was very important. In terms of the TBA addition that comes in with cleanup and that sort of thing, it seems like we could look at that and see if there's some way of incorporating it into the criteria that we have already. And I guess the final area, the presentation that listed several specific criteria for soil vapor and et cetera, I thought those were, I'd be interested in finding out what the response is to those specific criteria, which people seem to need. And finally, I would just like to say that, in my opinion, this is not this is not about saving money. We're going to be spending the money that is put forward by all of you who buy gas, and we're going to be spending that on highest priorities. Right now, some of the highest priorities aren't getting the attention that they need, and so that's an extremely important. For those of you who are under the misconception, I think that that somehow this is about saving money. It is not. It is about allocating money and spending it in ways that actually do protect water quality. And so, if that's the further comment that you're going to be making, just rethink that a little bit.
Thank you for that clarification, Fran.
Thank you, Fran. Those are very, very well said. Just want to take a moment, in addition to thanking staff, also thank the member of the stakeholder group, some of whom are in the audience today, and the rest are, I'm sure, watching this webcast with rapt attention. You guys put in a lot of tremendous work, took a lot of criticism, and stuck with it and developed, I think, your best recommendations to us for consideration, and I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Tam. As I mentioned in my opening comments, the board will not act on this today, but we will certainly take into consideration all the written comments received and all the oral comments we heard today. With that, I will close this portion of the hearing, and we will adjourn the formal board meeting that preceded it. Thank you all.